The shovel hit metal at 4 feet, and the sound it made was wrong. Not the dull scrape of a buried pipe or the crack of old fieldstone. This was a hollow, resonant clang, the kind of sound that means someone put something down there on purpose and wanted it to survive. I'd been digging a new drainage trench behind my father's barn because the back pasture had been flooding every spring for 3 years. And my father had been dead for 7 months. And I was finally the kind of numb that lets you do manual labor without crying into the dirt. The property was mine now. The debts were mine. The sagging barn with its rusted hinges and the smell of hay that hadn't been fresh since I was 16, and all mine. My name is Joel Maddox. I was 31 years old, standing in my dead father's back field in rural Harlan County, Kentucky, on a Thursday afternoon in October. And I had just found something he never told me about. I widened the hole. The metal was olive drab, military surplus green. And it wasn't one container, it was 3. Pelican-style cases, sealed with heavy-duty latches and wrapped in thick plastic sheeting. Below those, a longer crate, maybe 5 feet, made of wood with stenciled letters I couldn't read through the dirt. And beneath all of it, a black waterproof duffel so heavy I had to get down into the hole and use my legs to haul it up. I sat on the edge of the trench with my boots dangling into the grave my father had dug, because that's what it was, I realized. A grave for things he wanted to outlast him. Inside the first case, 12 Israeli-made gas mask filters, still factory sealed. 2 gas masks, adult size. A laminated card with handwritten decontamination instructions. Inside the second case, a field trauma kit that would make a paramedic jealous. Quick clot, chest seals, a surgical airway kit, tourniquets, antibiotics in blister packs with expiration dates 5 years out. Iodine, suture kits, 2 bottles of ketamine with vet use stamped on the labels. Inside the third case, 1,400 rounds of 5.56 NATO, boxed and stacked clean. 8 loaded magazines. Night Vision APVS-14 monocular in its own padded case with spare batteries. A radio, military grade, with a frequency list taped to the back in my father's handwriting. The long wooden crate held 2 rifles. An M4 pattern carbine with a red dot optic and a suppressor sealed in cosmoline. Beside it, a scoped bolt-action, a Remington 700 in .308, the same rifle my father used to hunt elk in Colorado in 1996, or one identical to it. The duffel was food, MREs, 60 of them, packed tight. I sat in the dirt behind the barn where I'd played as a child, where my father had once built me a tire swing that still hung from the oak by the fence. And I stared at a cache that must have cost him $10,000 or more. He'd buried it in the field. He'd told no one. He'd died of pancreatic cancer in a hospital bed in Harlan with my hand on his chest. And he had not said one single word about any of this. My father was not a prepper. He wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He was a retired Army staff sergeant who drove a Ford Ranger and read Louis L'Amour novels and attended church on Easter and Christmas and no other day. He coached Little League when I was 9. He made spaghetti on Fridays. He voted but didn't talk about it. But he'd buried a small armory behind his barn. I called my sister Naomi, who lived 40 minutes away in Everts with her husband Derek and their 2 kids. "You need to come out here," I said. "Tomorrow. Bring Derek." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Just Dad left something. I can't explain it over the phone." She was quiet for a moment. Naomi was 4 years older than me, pragmatic in a way that made her seem cold to people who didn't know her. She ran the books for 3 small businesses in town and had never once missed a deadline. Is it money? She asked. No, it's not money. Joel. Tomorrow, Naomi, please. She agreed, the way she always agreed with me, with a sigh that said she was already calculating the cost of rearranging her schedule. I put the cases back in the hole and covered them with a tarp, then loose dirt, then a sheet of plywood weighed down with cinder blocks. I don't know why I felt the need to hide them again. There was no one around for a quarter mile. But something about the way my father had sealed those cases, the precision of it, the silence he'd kept, made me feel like I'd opened something that was supposed to stay closed until the right moment. I didn't know the right moment was less than 20 hours away. That night, I did what I always did. I heated a can of chili on the stove my father had bought in 2003. Ate it standing at the counter because sitting at the table alone felt like a statement I wasn't ready to make. And turned on the television. The news was strange. But the news had been strange for years. A segment about a quarantine in Guangzhou. 14 seconds of shaky footage. People in hazmat suits entering an apartment building, a barricade of police vehicles, a woman screaming in Cantonese while a man held her back. The anchor moved on to talk about grain futures. I almost changed the channel, but something in the footage snagged me. The woman wasn't just afraid. She was grieving. There's a difference in the body, in the way the shoulders collapse. Fear makes you rigid. Grief makes you formless. That woman had already lost someone inside that building. I flipped to another channel. A BBC correspondent in Seoul was standing outside a hospital, speaking calmly about an atypical viral encephalitis cluster that had been reported in 6 countries over the past 72 hours. South Korea had closed 2 ports. Japan had suspended flights from mainland China. The European Center for Disease Prevention had issued a monitoring advisory. None of this was on the American networks. I checked 3 of them. One was running a segment on a celebrity divorce. Another had a panel arguing about tax policy. The third was showing college football highlights. I turned off the television and went outside. The night was cold and clear, the kind of October night in eastern Kentucky where you can see the Milky Way if you get far enough from the porch light. I stood in the yard and looked at the barn and the dark field beyond it, where my father's cash lay buried. And I felt, for the first time in months, something other than grief. I couldn't name it yet. It sat below my sternum like a swallowed stone. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Boone, my closest friend since high school, who managed the hardware store on Main Street in Harlan. You watching the news? Which news? Any of it. They closed the airport in Atlanta. DHS is saying it's a systems failure, but my cousin works TSA at Hartsfield. And he says they evacuated Terminal B, and there were people in full MOPP gear on the jet bridge. MOPP gear. Mission-Oriented Protective Posture. My father had taught me that term when I was 12, sitting on this same porch, telling me about his time in Desert Storm, with the casual understatement of a man who had seen nerve agent preparation drills and considered them unremarkable. I stared at my phone. How recent? I typed. 2 hours ago. He sent me a photo, but it's blurry. Joel, I don't want to be that guy. But something feels off. The Guangzhou thing. Now this. You feel it? I did feel it. That was the stone in my chest. Not grief. Recognition. I went back inside and pulled up everything I could find. Reddit threads, aviation forums, international wire services. The picture that emerged was fragmented but directional. Over the past 5 days, hospital lockdowns in Wuhan, Guangzhou, Manila, and Lagos. A leaked WHO internal memo unverified, referencing aggressive post-mortem neural reactivation. A video from a hospital in the Philippines that I watched once and then closed. It showed a man on a gurney biting through the forearm of a nurse while two orderlies tried to hold him down. His eyes were open but wrong, pupil blown, fixed. The eyes of someone who is no longer making decisions with the part of the brain that makes you human. I called Naomi again. "Come tonight," I said. "Not tomorrow. Tonight. Bring the kids." "Joel, it's 9:30. Lily has school in the..." "Pull her out. Pack clothes for a week. Bring Derek. Bring whatever food you have in the pantry." Silence. Then carefully, "Are you having an episode?" She meant a depressive episode. I'd had 2 since Dad died. I didn't blame her for asking. "No, I'm clear-headed. Naomi, I need you to look something up for me right now. Search for Guangzhou quarantine. Read what you find. Then call me back." She called back in 11 minutes. Her voice was different. "We'll be there by midnight," she said. They arrived at 12:15. Derek's truck pulled up the gravel drive with the headlights cutting through fog that had settled in the hollow like something poured. Naomi was in the passenger seat with Lily, who was 9, asleep against her shoulder. Derek carried their son, Sam, who was 6, wrapped in a blanket and boneless with sleep the way only children can be. Derek Hollis was a good man in the specific way that mattered most in Harlan County. He was reliable. He worked as a diesel mechanic at a mining equipment company, had hands that could rebuild a transmission by feel, and he didn't panic. He also didn't talk much, which people mistook for simplicity. Derek wasn't simple. He just didn't see the point in saying things that didn't need saying. He set Sam down on the couch in the living room and looked at me. "Naomi showed me the videos on the drive over," he said. "What's in the barn?" I told them. We stood in the kitchen, Naomi leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. Derek with his hands in his jacket pockets, and I told them about the cash. The rifles, the ammunition, the medical kit, the night vision, the MRS. Naomi's face did something complicated. She looked at the floor, then at the window, then at me. "He knew," she said. "He didn't know this specifically. He knew something. He knew enough to bury it." She pressed her fingers against her eyes. "He could have told us." "He told us in his own way," I said, and I meant the cash itself, the act of preparation as a form of communication, but Naomi shook her head. "That's not telling, Joel. That's leaving a puzzle. That's making us figure it out after he's gone, like everything else." She wasn't wrong. Our father had been a man who expressed love through action and sometimes silence isn't enough. Sometimes you need the words. He never learned that. Derek broke the tension the way he always did, by being practical. "If what's on the internet is real and it's moving fast, then we have maybe a day, maybe 2. Before it's here or before the roads are shut down, we need to decide now. Do we stay or do we go?" It was the right question. The only question. "Stay," I said. "This property has advantages. We're a quarter-mile off the county road. The terrain funnels approach from the south through the creek bed. You can see it from the barn loft. We have well water, propane tanks 3/4 full. The barn is solid framing, and there's enough lumber in the old equipment shed to board the windows." Derek looked at Naomi. She looked at me. "You've been thinking about this," she said. Wasn't an accusation. It was almost admiration. "Since about 9:30 tonight, yeah." "Okay." She straightened. "Then we start now. Derek, help Joel bring whatever's buried up into the barn. I'll inventory what we brought and what's in the pantry. We work until dawn and we sleep in shifts after." That was Naomi. 4 hours ago, she thought I was having a breakdown. Now she was running logistics. She adapted faster than anyone I've ever known because she didn't waste time on disbelief. She processed, decided, and moved. We worked through the night. Derek and I hauled the cash into the barn and laid everything out on the workbench under the fluorescent lights. He handled the rifles with the ease of a man who'd grown up hunting, checked the actions, inspected the barrels, loaded the magazines without being told. I set up the radio and scanned the frequency list my father had left. Most channels were dead. But on one, a frequency labeled FEMA-R7. In my father's precise block lettering, I caught a burst of encrypted traffic. Just the sound of it, the digital chatter, told me this was real, and it was already bigger than anyone was admitting. At 4 a.m, I stood in the barn door and looked east toward the ridge. The fog had thickened. Somewhere beyond it, the world was changing. And we were 4 adults and 2 sleeping children on a dead man's farm, with a buried arsenal and whatever time was left. The cell towers died at 6:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I was on the phone with Marcus when the call dropped. And I looked at the screen and watched the signal bars vanish one by one like candles being snuffed. Marcus had been talking fast. He'd opened the hardware store early because people were already lining up, not for hardware, for plywood, for batteries, for the propane adapters he kept behind the counter. He said Main Street looked wrong. Too many cars. A truck from the National Guard had passed through around 5 but hadn't stopped. The food city was already stripped of bottled water. There's something else, Marcus said. Earl Combs came into the store 10 minutes ago. He was driving back from Lexington last night, and he said they've got roadblocks on a 75 north of London. Not police, military. And he said... The call died. I tried to call back. Nothing. No signal, no data, no connection. I switched to the radio and scanned the civilian bands. AM frequencies were still broadcasting, but only 2. An automated emergency alert system loop telling people to shelter in place and await further instructions. And a station out of Knoxville where a man was speaking in the breathless, unscripted cadence of someone who knows the teleprompter is irrelevant. Confirmed reports of coordinated attacks on civilian populations in Nashville, Atlanta, Charlotte, and Memphis. We are being told these are not attacks in the traditional sense. The CDC briefing from last night, which was not aired by any major network, described what they're calling a rapid onset neuroactive contagion that is transmitted through. The station cut to dead air. Then the EAS tone, then nothing. Naomi was standing behind me. I hadn't heard her come into the barn. The kids are awake, she said. Lily's asking why we're at Uncle Joel's on a school day. What did you tell her? That the power's out at their school. She believed it because she's 9. Sam doesn't care. He found a cat in the barn. There was a feral tabby that had been living in the hayloft since summer. I'd been leaving food out for it. Derek's already started on the windows, Naomi continued. He pulled the plywood from the shed. We've got enough for the first floor of the house, but the barn's too many openings. He wants to know your priority. House first. All ground floor windows, front and back doors get reinforced. Leave one window on the south side with a removable panel. That's our observation point. The barn, we secure the main doors and leave the loft hatch accessible. That's our high ground. She nodded and turned to leave, then stopped. Joel, what happens when Marcus and other people start showing up? I'd been thinking about that since 3 a.m. The farm was remote, but not unknown. Marcus knew where I lived. So did a dozen other people. When things got bad in town, some of them would remember the Maddox place off County Road 38, with its well water and its isolation and its fields of fire. We take Marcus, I said. He's useful and he's alone. Anyone else we assess. But we can't feed a crowd, Naomi. 60 MREs and whatever's in the pantry, that's maybe 3 weeks for 6 people. Every person we add shortens the clock. And if someone comes with children? I didn't answer. She didn't push it. We both understood the question was a wound we'd have to open later. By 9 in the morning, the house was boarded, and Derek had reinforced the front door with a crossbar made from an oak 4x4. The barn was secured. I'd positioned the M4 at the south window and the bolt action in the loft with a clear line of sight to the road. The radio sat on the kitchen table, scanning continuously. And at 9:22 a.m., we heard the first gunshot, distant maybe 2 miles south, toward town. A single crack, then silence. Then 3 more in quick succession. Then, faintly, screaming. Marcus arrived at 11:40, driving his truck at a speed that sent gravel spraying against the porch when he braked. He was out of the cab before the engine died, and I saw 3 things simultaneously. He had a shotgun across his back. He was bleeding from a cut above his left ear, and he was not alone. A woman climbed out of the passenger side. Mid-20s, dark hair pulled back, wearing medical scrubs under an unzipped jacket. She was carrying a backpack that looked heavy and a plastic bag from a pharmacy. Joel. Marcus was breathing hard. He was a big man, 6'2", broad, with a red beard he kept trimmed and forearms built from years of stocking shelves and splitting firewood. His eyes were wrong, wide and fixed in a way I'd never seen from him, not even the night his mother died. Joel, it's real. It's in town. Slow down. Who's she? Priya Dasgupta. She's a nurse at the clinic. I found her. We need to go inside. Marcus, tell me what happened. He swallowed, looked back at the road like something might follow the dust cloud his truck had left. There are people in town who aren't people anymore. I don't know how else to say it. I saw Wayne Hendricks walking down Main Street with his jaw hanging open and his shirt covered in blood, and he was Joel. He was eating Darla Pennington. On the sidewalk, in front of the post office. I shot him with the Mossberg. And he didn't fall. He looked at me and he started walking toward me, and I shot him again. And he went down, but then he started crawling. I got in the truck. Priya was running down Oak Street, and I almost hit her. She jumped in and we drove here. Priya spoke for the first time. Her voice was steady, clinical, but underneath it was a vibration of controlled terror. It's a prion-adjacent pathogen. That's what the internal CDC communications said before the systems went down. Rapid neurodegeneration of the prefrontal cortex and limbic system with paradoxical hyperactivation of the brainstem and motor cortex. The infected lose higher function but retain motor capability and aggressive response to stimuli. Bites transmit the pathogen through saliva contact with the bloodstream. Incubation is between 40 minutes and 4 hours, depending on viral load and bite location. Naomi had come out onto the porch. She'd heard all of it. How do you stop them? She asked. Catastrophic brain injury, Priya said. Destruction of the brainstem. Nothing else works reliably. They don't respond to pain. They don't bleed out at a normal rate because their blood pressure regulation is gone. The heart just pumps until it can't. You learned all that from a CDC brief. Priya looked at Naomi with an expression that was part exhaustion and part something harder. I learned it from watching 3 of my patients turn in the clinic overnight and trying to keep them restrained while their families screamed. One of them was a 6-year-old boy who had been bitten by his father at dinner last night. His mother brought him in thinking it was a dog bite. She paused. I couldn't save him. I couldn't save any of them. So, yes, I paid very close attention to what was happening. because if I stopped thinking clinically, I was going to start screaming and never stop. I brought them inside. Derek shook Marcus's hand and nodded at Priya and said nothing, which was exactly right. Naomi took Priya's backpack. It was full of medical supplies she'd grabbed from the clinic, and added it to our inventory without being asked. We were 7 now. 4 adults, 1 medical professional, 2 children. We had weapons, water, food for maybe 18 days at the current count, and a farmhouse at the end of a quarter-mile gravel road in a hollow that might as well have been the end of the earth. The gunfire from town had stopped. I didn't know if that was good or terrible. Probably terrible. At noon, I climbed to the barn loft and looked through the scope of the Remington toward the county road. For 20 minutes, nothing. Then a car passed heading west, moving fast, weaving. Then another. Then a pickup truck towing a horse trailer with the back gate swinging open and no horses inside. Then nothing for an hour. Then a figure appeared at the far end of the road, walking. Slow, uneven, dragging one leg. It was too far to see details, but I watched it through the scope, and I saw the way it moved, not with the purposeful asymmetry of an injury, but with the mechanical wrongness of a body operating without a mind to coordinate it. One arm swung loose. The head lolled and then snapped upright when a bird startled from a fence post nearby. It stopped in the road. It stood there, swaying. Then it turned toward the farm, not toward the driveway. There was no driveway visible from that angle. It turned toward the farm the way a dog turns toward a sound, with its whole body, with instinct, with something that had nothing to do with thought. It began walking toward us. I chambered around. I didn't take the shot. At that range, roughly 400 yards through the scope, I could have. The Remington was sighted. The air was still. But Priya had come up the ladder behind me, and she put her hand on my arm and said, "Wait. It's coming this way." It's responding to stimuli. Sound, possibly scent. If you fire, you create a new stimulus. A louder one. If there are others in the area, and there will be the gunshot, draws them. She was right. And I knew it immediately. And it changed everything about how I'd been thinking. The figure shambled off the road and into the tree line about 200 yards south. It didn't emerge. Maybe it found something else to focus on. Maybe it simply lost track of whatever had drawn it. I kept the scope on the trees for another 30 minutes, then climbed down. We held a meeting at the kitchen table. All 4 adults. Lily and Sam were in the back bedroom. Naomi had set them up with coloring books and a battery-powered radio playing the only station still broadcasting, which was now just the EAS loop. "We can't rely on firearms as our primary defense," I said. "Every shot is a beacon. We use them only as last resort." "Then what?" Marcus asked. Derek spoke up, which meant he'd been thinking about it for a while. "The property has natural funneling. Creek bed to the south, steep ridge to the east, the road to the west. The only easy approach is from the north across the back field. If we dig a trench line across the north approach, doesn't have to be deep. 3 feet is enough to drop anything that can't think to step over it. And we line the south tree line with wire and noise traps. We create a perimeter that warns us before anything gets close." "Noise traps draw them too," Priya said. "Noise traps tell us where they are. A gunshot at the house tells them where we are. There's a difference." Priya considered this and nodded. "I've got fencing wire in the barn," I said. "Dad kept hundreds of feet of it. We've got tin cans, glass jars. We can rig a line through the trees that makes noise when it's disturbed." "And the trench, Derek. You and I can dig that by tonight if we start now." "I'll help," Marcus said. "I brought tools." The truck's got a full toolbox, and I grabbed 2 chainsaws from the store before I left. Chainsaws are useful for barriers, not for defense, Naomi said. Too loud. I know. For barriers. We fell some of those pines along the creek and stacked them across the southern approach. Slows anything coming through the trees. This was how it worked. Not heroics, not panic, logistics. My father had understood that. Survival isn't a dramatic act. It's a series of practical decisions made under pressure, and the people who live are the ones who make those decisions clearly and early. We worked through the afternoon. Derek and I dug the northern trench while Marcus felled pines and dragged them into position with a chain hitched to his truck. Naomi ran wire through the southern tree line with Priya, who turned out to be methodical and tireless, stringing tin can tripwires at ankle height with the precision of someone accustomed to threading sutures. By dusk, we had a perimeter, imperfect, improvised, but real. The trench was crude 3 feet deep, 4 feet wide, running 60 yards across the open approach to the back field. The southern tree line was wired. The creek bed to the south was a natural obstacle. The road to the west was visible from the barn loft and the house's south window. We ate MREs on the porch as the sun went down. Nobody said much. Lily sat on Naomi's lap and asked if the power would be back on tomorrow. And Naomi said maybe, and the lie was so gentle it almost sounded true. That night, I took first watch in the loft. Marcus took second. Derek took third. From the loft, with the PVS-14 monocular, the world was green and grainy and silent. I could see the road. I could see the tree line. I could see the trench, pale against the dark field. At 2 a.m, 3 figures emerged from the trees to the south. The wire traps clinked and rattled, and I watched them through the night vision. 3 shapes moving in that distinctive broken gait, bumping into the felled pines, redirecting, bumping again. They couldn't get through. They didn't try to climb over. After 20 minutes, 2 of them wandered back into the trees. The third stood at the log barrier, swaying until dawn. When the sun came up, I could see it clearly through the scope. It had been a woman. She was wearing a church dress, pale blue, now dark with dried blood. One of her shoes was missing. She stood at the barrier with her arms at her sides and her head tilted. And she didn't move. And she didn't leave. I watched her for an hour. Then I went downstairs and slept for 4 hours and tried not to dream about what Sundays used to look like. On the 3rd day, a living person came to the farm. I was in the barn loft when I saw movement on the road. Not the shuffling wrongness of the infected. This was deliberate, cautious, human. A man walking close to the tree line, stopping every few steps to look behind him, carrying a rifle in the low ready position that spoke of training. I watched him through the scope. 50s, lean gray hair under a boonie hat, civilian clothes, but the way he moved was military. He spotted the driveway and stopped, studied the house, studied the barn. He knew someone was there, the boarded windows told him that. He stood at the mouth of the driveway for a full minute, then raised one hand, palm out, and waited. I came down and told Derek. We went out together, Derek with the M4, me with the shotgun Marcus had brought. "That's far enough," I called when the man was 50 yards out. He stopped, kept his hand up. His rifle, an AR-15 with a worn stock, was slung across his back now. "Name's Wendell Pruitt," he said. "Retired 82nd Airborne. I've been walking since yesterday from Pine Mountain. My truck died on the highway, and I've been on foot since." "You alone?" "I am now. Started with my neighbor and his wife. Lost them at the Route 119 interchange." There were a lot of them there. Dozens, maybe more. They were all over the cars. Are you bitten? No, sir. I'll strip to my shorts right here if you need to see. Naomi had come out onto the porch. She looked at me and I looked at Derek, and Derek gave a small nod. Come inside, I said, slowly. Wendell Pruitt ate 2 MREs without pausing and drank a quart of water and then told us what the world looked like between here and Pine Mountain. And none of it was good. The National Guard had attempted a containment line along I-75 on the first day. By the second day, the line had collapsed. Wendell had seen the aftermath: abandoned Humvees, spent brass on the asphalt, blood trails leading into the woods. The Guard hadn't been overrun by a horde. They'd been undermined from within. Soldiers bitten during the initial contact turned hours later inside the perimeter, and the line disintegrated from the center. They're not like the movies, Wendell said. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a coffee mug, though there was only water in it. They don't come in waves. They wander. They follow sound. They cluster where there's noise or movement, but they don't coordinate. The danger isn't a horde, it's the one you don't see because you are watching the 3 you could. How many between here and the highway? I asked. Scattered. Maybe 1 every quarter mile in the rural stretches. More near the towns. Harlan's gone. I skirted the edge of it yesterday evening and the streets were full of them. Some were just standing in yards, in parking lots, like they were waiting for something to react to. Marcus leaned forward. Waiting. They go dormant when there's no stimulus. I watched one stand in a gas station lot for 40 minutes without moving. Then a car alarm went off 2 blocks away, and it turned and started walking toward the sound. They're not dead. Not exactly. They're reduced, down to the oldest parts of the brain, hunger and response. Priya was listening from the doorway. That matches the pathology. Brainstem dominant function. No planning, no memory, no fear. Just stimulus and response. Wendell looked at her. Are you medical? Nurse practitioner. I was at the Harlan clinic when it started. Then you know more than most. Can I ask you something? Yes. How long do they last? Without food? Without water? Do they starve? Priya hesitated. It was the first time I'd seen her uncertain. I don't know. The metabolic rate of the infected is massively elevated. They should burn through caloric reserves quickly. But the pathogen seems to alter metabolic pathways. I've seen infected patients with no food or water for over 36 hours still exhibiting full motor capability. The honest answer is, I don't know if they stop. The room was quiet. Okay, Derek said. So we plan for them not stopping. Wendell stayed. He was useful immediately. He helped redesign the perimeter based on his experience with defensive positions. Suggested we create a secondary fallback point in the barn in case the house was breached. And he knew radio protocols that let us scan military frequencies more efficiently. On the radio that night, we caught a fragmented broadcast from what sounded like a FEMA coordination center. The voice was tired and professional, and it said, among the static, that primary evacuation corridors in the southeastern United States were compromised, and that civilians should shelter in place until further notice. Further notice, Marcus repeated. That's what they say when they don't have a plan. Nobody argued. On the 5th day, we faced the question Naomi had asked me on the first night, and it nearly broke us. A family appeared on the road in the early afternoon. A man, a woman, and 3 children. The youngest was being carried. They were moving slowly, exhausted, and the woman was limping. They saw the farm and turned toward it, and the man began calling out, "Please, we have children. Please, we need help." I was in the loft. Naomi was at the south window. Marcus and Derek were reinforcing the western fence line and came running when they heard the shouting. "Joel," Naomi's voice on the walkie-talkie. Tight, controlled. "Joel, there are kids. I see them. We can't turn away children. I know, but... Joel." I climbed down, met Derek and Marcus at the front of the house. Wendell had positioned himself at the barn door with the M4, watching the road behind the family, because Wendell was the kind of man who thought about what might follow. I walked to the end of the driveway. "Stop there," I called. "How many of you? Is anyone bitten? Is anyone sick?" The man mid-30s, hollow-eyed, wearing a jacket too thin for October, raised his hands. "5 of us. Nobody's bitten. My wife hurt her ankle on the road. We've been walking since yesterday. We were in Cumberland. It's gone. The whole town. We just need somewhere safe. Just for a night. Please." The 3 children stood in a tight cluster behind their mother. The oldest was maybe 12. The youngest, in the woman's arms, couldn't have been more than 2. I looked back at the house. Naomi was on the porch. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her face said everything: the calculation between compassion and survival, the arithmetic of mouths versus meals, the unbearable weight of deciding that a child's life costs you days. We took them in. Of course we did. Because there are limits to the math. And those limits are drawn by the face of a 2-year-old who doesn't understand why her mother is crying. Their names were Craig and Elena Whitfield, and their children were Owen, 12, Jade, 8, and Mia, the toddler. They were from Cumberland, and Craig's account confirmed what Wendell had said: the towns were gone. Cumberland had fallen in a single night when the infected poured out of the hospital where the first cases had been brought and spread through the residential streets faster than anyone could react. Elena's ankle was badly sprained. Priya wrapped it with supplies from the clinic bag and told her to stay off it for 3 days, minimum. Craig was a carpenter useful, and he offered immediately to help reinforce the house. But the math had changed. 12 people. 60 MREs, minus what we'd already consumed. The pantry supplies. Maybe 10 days of food if we rationed carefully. That night, Marcus pulled me aside in the barn. "You know we can't keep doing this," he said. "Doing what?" "Taking people in. Every family that finds us. Every stranger on the road. I'm not saying we should have turned them away. I don't think I could have looked at those kids and said no either. But the next group, Joel, and the one after that. At some point, saving everyone means no one survives." He was right. And I hated him for being right. And I hated myself for already knowing it. And I hated the world for building a situation where love and survival could point in opposite directions. "We close the door," I said. "After this, unless someone brings supplies or skills we critically need, we close the door." Marcus looked at me for a long time. "Can you do that? If they've got kids?" "I have to." That's not what I asked. I didn't answer because the answer was no, and we both knew it. And some truths are heavy enough that saying them out loud makes them real in a way you can't take back. 8 days in, 12 people, rationing, tension between the adults that hadn't erupted yet but sat in the air like ozone before a storm. The children had adapted faster than any of us expected or wanted. Lily and Jade had become inseparable, building elaborate games in the back bedroom that involved whispered rules and blanket forts. Owen, Craig's 12-year-old, had attached himself to Wendell, who taught him to read the terrain from the loft and identify infected movement by gait alone. Sam, Naomi's 6-year-old, carried the barn cat everywhere and talked to it in low, serious tones, explaining things he shouldn't have had to understand. Mia, the toddler, cried. Not constantly, but enough. At night, especially, Elena would hold her and pace and shush her. And the sound carried. And every time it did, I watched Priya's face tighten. Because Priya understood what sound meant in this new world. On the 8th night, the wire sang. The tin can trip lines in the southern tree line erupted not 1 or 2 cans, but dozens. A cascading rattle that moved east to west across the entire perimeter like something was pushing through the trees in a broad front. I was in the loft. I grabbed the PVS-14 and looked. Green shapes, moving through the trees. Not 3, not 5. I counted and stopped at 20 because more kept appearing behind them. Everyone up, I said into the walkie-talkie, keeping my voice flat, though my hands had gone cold. We have a large group approaching from the south. 20 plus, moving through the tree line toward the log barrier. Derek was at the south window in 30 seconds. Marcus took the barn door. Wendell materialized beside me in the loft with the calm of a man for whom alarm was a professional state rather than an emotional one. They're clustered, he said, looking through the scope. Something pushed them this direction. Maybe a sound source to the south, car horn, generator, something that got them moving in a group. They'll hit the logs and spread. Some will get through. The felled pines are only 2 deep in the center section, I said. Marcus and I were going to add a 3rd row tomorrow. Tomorrow's not here. What's behind the logs? 50 yards of open ground to the trench, then the trench, then another 40 to the barn. If they cross the logs and reach the trench, some will fall in. The rest will stack up behind them. That's our kill zone, if it comes to that. Firing means drawing more. Not firing means they reach the buildings. The first infected hit the log barrier. I could hear the impact at a wet, heavy thud, a body walking into an obstacle without slowing, without bracing. Then another. Then the sound of limbs scraping bark as they tried to move through. Naomi's voice on the radio, controlled but thin. I've got the kids in the back bedroom with Elena. Doors barricaded. Craig is with me at the kitchen window. What do you need? Stay inside. Keep the lights off. Keep Mia quiet. Whatever it takes. The infected pressed against the log barrier like water against a dam. Some tried to climb over and fell. Some found the gaps where the trees hadn't been stacked tight enough and began worming through. One emerged on our side, a man in overalls, moving with that broken, relentless gait, and began crossing the open ground toward the trench. Then another. Then 4 more. Contact, Wendell said, and his voice was ice. The first 3 fell into the trench. I heard them hit the bottom, a sound I will carry for as long as I live. The sound of bodies impacting earth without any attempt to catch themselves. Because the part of the brain that protects the body from impact was gone. They didn't cry out. They thrashed, down there in the dark, clawing at the dirt walls. The 4th walked to the edge of the trench and stopped. It stood there, swaying, and I thought for a moment it would turn back. Then it stepped forward into the trench, as if the concept of falling didn't exist in whatever was left of its mind. But behind the trench, more were coming through the log barrier. Suppressed rifle, I said. Headshots only. Wendell, you call them. The suppressor on the M4 didn't make the rifle silent. That's a movie fantasy. It made it quieter. A heavy mechanical cough instead of a crack. I fired from the loft, aiming for the heads of the infected crossing the open ground. I missed the first shot, hit the second. The figure dropped and didn't move. Wendell called adjustments. Left 5 yards, moving right to left, lead slightly. And I found a rhythm, not a comfortable one. There is nothing comfortable about looking through a scope at something that used to be a person and pressing a trigger and watching it collapse. Derek fired from the south window. Marcus held the barn door. For 12 minutes, we held the line. I counted 11 that I put down in the open ground. Derek accounted for 6 more. The rest, those that hadn't breached the logs, eventually lost focus. The sound of our suppressed shots wasn't loud enough to keep drawing them. They milled in the tree line, bumped against the barrier, and slowly, over the next hour, began to drift away. When dawn came, I counted the bodies in the field. 17. We buried them that afternoon. All of us, even Craig and Priya, digging graves in the back pasture while the children stayed inside. Nobody spoke during the burial. There was nothing to say that wouldn't have been a lie or a cruelty. By day 12, the food situation was no longer a concern. It was a crisis. Rationing had stretched our supplies, but 12 people eat regardless of discipline, and the MREs were gone. The pantry stocks were rice, canned vegetables, dried beans. A bag of flour would last perhaps 4 more days at subsistence level. The adults were eating 1 meal a day. The children got 2, though the portions were small enough that Lily had started hiding food under her pillow, a behavior that Naomi discovered and handled with a tenderness that broke something in me I didn't know was still intact. She thinks there won't be more, Naomi told me. She's not wrong to think that. I'd been considering a supply run for 3 days. The closest possibility was the Hendersons' farm, 2 miles east through the Ridge Trail. The Hendersons had been preppers in a casual way, a full pantry, chickens, a root cellar. Whether they were still alive was unknown. Whether their supplies were still there was unknown. Everything was unknown, and the only way to replace unknown with known was to walk 2 miles through territory we hadn't scouted since the outbreak. I planned the run with Wendell. We'd go at first light. 2 people, moving fast and quiet, carrying suppressed weapons and empty packs. In and out in 4 hours if the route was clear. Marcus wanted to come. I'm the strongest here. If there's stuff to carry, you want me. If something happens to all 3 of us, this farm has Derek, Naomi, Craig, and Priya. That's not enough fighters. Derek and Craig can hold the perimeter. You need a 3rd on the run. 2 is a line, 3 is a formation. Wendell settled it. He's right. 3 is better. If one of us is engaged, 2 can still carry. If one is injured, 2 can still move the casualty. 3 of us then, at dawn. The night before the run, I sat on the porch with Priya. She was cataloging her remaining medical supplies by flashlight, a task she performed every night with the ritualistic precision of someone who finds comfort in inventory. We're losing the ketamine, she said. It's temperature sensitive. Without refrigeration, it'll degrade within the month. Is that critical? It's our only surgical anesthetic. If someone needs a field amputation, if someone gets bitten on a limb, and we try to save them by taking the limb before the pathogen spreads, I need it. Without it, the best I can do is a leather belt and an apology. Has anyone ever survived amputation after a bite? Do you know? I don't know. I don't think anyone knows yet. The pathogen spreads through the bloodstream. So theoretically, if you amputate fast enough, before the pathogen crosses a certain saturation threshold maybe. It's a terrible maybe. She closed her inventory book, a small notebook she'd taken from the clinic, every page covered in her precise handwriting. Joel, can I say something direct? always. The Whitfield family is draining us faster than the additional help they provide. Craig is a good worker, but 5 mouths is 5 mouths. Elena's ankle isn't healing because she's malnourished. Owen is useful in the loft, but he's 12 and he's starting to show stress behaviors. Nail biting, insomnia, compulsive checking. The toddler is a noise liability that we haven't addressed because none of us can bring ourselves to say it. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you the medical reality. If we don't increase food supply within the next week, the children will begin showing signs of caloric deficiency. Adults can push through hunger. Children can't. Their bodies and minds are still developing, and chronic undernutrition at their ages causes damage that doesn't reverse. I stared at the dark field. Tomorrow's run will help, I said. Tomorrow's run might help. If the farm is intact, if the supplies are there, if all 3 of you come back. She wasn't being cruel. She was being precise, which is what I needed from her, even when precision felt like a knife. We left at first light. Wendell on point, me in the middle, Marcus at the rear. We moved through the ridge trail in single file, staying below the tree line, stopping every 100 yards to listen. The morning was cold and still, and the forest had the eerie quality of a world that was returning to silence. No road noise, no aircraft, no distant machinery. Just wind and birds, and the occasional crack of a branch that made all 3 of us freeze and raise our weapons. We reached the Henderson property in 90 minutes. It sat in a small clearing, a white clapboard house, a chicken coop, a red barn, and the root cellar built into the hillside behind the house. No smoke from the chimney, no movement. The front door was open. Wendell hand-signaled us to hold position while he advanced along the tree line to get a view of the back of the house. Marcus and I waited, crouched, scanning. The chicken coop was destroyed, wire torn open, feathers scattered. Whatever had happened here had happened days ago. Wendell came back. His face told me most of it. Back doors open too, blood on the porch. No bodies visible inside, but I can see overturned furniture through the window. There's one infected in the backyard. Old man, sitting against the barn wall, not moving. Dormant? Looks like it. If we're quiet, we can bypass him and access the root cellar from the side. We moved in. The dormant infected. And I knew, with a sickness that hit me in the chest, that it was Ray Henderson, 72 years old, who'd sold my father hay for 20 years, sat against the barn, with his chin on his chest and his hands in his lap like a man napping. Except his hands were black with dried blood, and his neck was torn open on one side, and the wound had the ragged edges of teeth. He'd been bitten. He'd turned. His wife Carol was nowhere in sight. I didn't look inside the house. We reached the root cellar. The door was still closed, still latched from the outside. Inside, shelves of canned goods. Beans, tomatoes, corn, peaches, pickled vegetables, jars of preserves, sacks of dried rice and lentils, a basket of potatoes that had started to sprout. It was enough food to keep 12 people fed for 3 weeks, maybe more. Marcus let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for days. We loaded the packs. We filled them until the straps cut into our shoulders, and then we filled bags we made from feed sacks tied with twine. The return trip would be slower, heavily loaded, on an uphill ridge trail. Through territory we now knew contained at least one infected, and potentially more. I was tying off the last sack when Marcus, who was standing watch at the cellar entrance, made a low sound. "Joel, he's up." Ray Henderson was standing. His head was tilted toward us at that awful angle, listening or smelling or whatever sense drove them when higher function was gone. He was 40 feet away. I looked at Wendell. He shook his head. No shot. The noise would carry across the hollow, and there was no telling what might hear it. "We go around," Wendell whispered. "Wide left, through the tree line, slow and steady. Don't look at him. Eye contact isn't a trigger, but movement is. Keep your movements fluid. Nothing sudden." We moved. 3 men carrying 60 pounds each, stepping through leaf litter as carefully as though it were broken glass, circling wide around the thing that had been my father's neighbor. It turned slightly as we passed, tracking something sound, scent, vibration through the ground, but it didn't advance. Its head swiveled and stopped and swiveled again, like a satellite dish searching for a signal. We made the tree line. We made the ridge trail. Halfway home, Marcus stopped and bent over with his hands on his knees and breathed in great ragged gulps, and I realized he was crying. Not from fear, from relief, from the weight of the food on his back and the knowledge that the children would eat tonight. "I'm good," he said after a minute. "I'm good. Let's go." We walked home. 3 days after the Henderson run, with the food crisis temporarily relieved, the group began to fracture in ways that had nothing to do with the dead. It started with Craig. He'd been cooperative and hard-working since his arrival, but the dynamic shifted when survival stopped being minute to minute. With food in the cellar and the perimeter holding, there was time to think. And thinking was dangerous. Craig began questioning decisions. Not aggressively, he was too measured for that, but persistently. Why were watch schedules set by me and not by group vote? Why had we taken the Henderson supplies without discussing whether other survivors might need them? Why were the weapons controlled by 3 people when there were 12 on the farm? "I'm not challenging your authority," he said during one of these conversations. And the word authority landed like a stone in water. "There is no authority," I said. "There are people making decisions because they have experience, and there's no time for committees." There's time now. He wasn't wrong, and that was the problem. The acute crisis had receded just enough for democracy to feel possible. And democracy in a survival situation is a luxury that can kill you. Naomi handled it better than I did. She sat down with Craig and Elena and laid out the inventory, every can, every round, every medical supply. And she did it with the transparency that Craig was asking for, without the concession that decisions should be made by vote. She gave them information, and she gave them respect, and she did not give them control. And the difference was subtle, but essential. But the tension didn't resolve. It just changed shape. Elena, whose ankle was finally healing, began to withdraw. She spent hours in the back bedroom with Mia, not sleeping, just sitting. Priya recognized it first. "She's depressive," Priya told me. "Not clinical, not yet, but heading there. She lost her home, her community, her sense of safety. The adrenaline carried her for a week. Now it's gone, and she's facing the reality. What can we do? Give her purpose, a task, something that makes her feel useful rather than carried." Naomi gave Elena the kitchen. Meal planning, preparation, rationing. Elena took to it with a focus that was half healing and half obsession, counting portions with a precision that bordered on pathological, but that kept us fed and kept her present. Meanwhile, something else was happening that I noticed only because I was sleeping less than anyone and spending my insomniac hours wandering the dark house like a ghost of myself. Wendell was disappearing. Not physically. He was always where he was supposed to be, the loft, the perimeter, the radio. But mentally, he was somewhere else. I'd find him staring at the radio long after the batteries should have been conserved, listening to dead frequencies. I caught him twice making notes in a small notebook he kept in his breast pocket, notes he covered when I approached. On the 14th night, I asked him directly. We were in the loft, sharing a watch. The night was clear, and the PVS-14 showed an empty field, an empty road, an empty world. "Where do you go?" I said. "In your head, when you stare at the radio." He was quiet for a long time. "I had a daughter," he said. "Beth. She lived in Nashville. I haven't been able to reach her since day one." I waited. The broadcast from Knoxville on the first morning mentioned Nashville as one of the first cities hit. I've been scanning every frequency, every band, hoping to hear something, an evacuation report, a survivor broadcast, anything. 14 days, nothing. "Wendell, I know." His voice was steady but thinned, like a wire under tension. "I know the probabilities. I've been calculating them since the second day. Nashville, population 700,000. Infection rate estimates from the CDC brief suggest 60 to 80% within the first 72 hours in urban environments. The math says she's dead, or worse. You don't know that." "No, I don't. And that's the cruelest part. I can't know. I can't go to Nashville. It's 200 miles through infected territory. I can't reach her by phone or radio. I exist in a state of permanent uncertainty. And that uncertainty is eating me from the inside in a way that a confirmed death would not." He looked at me, and in the green glow of the night vision, his face was old and bare and broken in a way I recognized because I'd seen it in the mirror. "Your father," he said. "He built this cache because he knew something was coming. Not this specifically, but something. He prepared for you, for your sister. He did what a parent does. He tried to extend his protection beyond his own life. He didn't tell us, because he was afraid you'd think he was crazy, because the worst thing a parent can face isn't the disaster. It's the possibility that your children won't take it seriously until it's too late." I thought about my father in his hospital bed. The things he said and the things he didn't. The cache in the field. The silence that was its own kind of language. "We'll keep scanning for Nashville," I said. "Every night." Wendell didn't respond. He didn't need to. Some promises are made in the space between words. Day 19. The weather turned. The first frost came overnight. And when I climbed to the loft at dawn, the field was white, and the bodies we'd buried in the back pasture were slight mounds under a skin of ice. The air had the sharp, clean bite of real cold. And I realized with a specific, practical dread that we had no winter plan. The house had propane heat, and the tank was still 3/4 full. But 3/4 of a tank feeding 12 people through a Kentucky winter was a fantasy. We needed firewood cords of it, seasoned, split, and stacked. We needed insulation for the windows behind the plywood. We needed warmer clothing for the children, who had arrived with whatever was on their backs. We needed a long-term water plan, because the well pump ran on electricity, and we'd been operating it with a generator that consumed gasoline we couldn't replace. I laid all of this out at the morning meeting. The faces around the table showed the same understanding. We had been surviving the outbreak. Now, we had to survive the aftermath. Derek volunteered to lead a firewood detail with Craig. Marcus would work on converting the well to a hand pump. He'd been a hardware store manager and knew the parts, some of which he thought he could fabricate from materials in the barn. Priya proposed a hygiene and sanitation overhaul before winter sealed us inside together, because disease in close quarters could kill us faster than any infected. The plans were good, rational, necessary. They became irrelevant at 2:17 that afternoon. Owen spotted them first, from the loft where Wendell had taught him to keep watch. His voice came over the walkie-talkie with the controlled fear of a boy trying very hard to sound like the soldiers he admired. Movement on the road. A lot of movement, coming from the east. I was in the barn in 60 seconds. Up the ladder, through the scope. The road was full. Not dozens, not the scattered clusters we'd seen before. A mass of infected, moving westward along the county road in a loose, staggering column that stretched beyond the range of the scope. Hundreds, maybe more than hundreds. They moved at the same relentless walking pace, bumping into each other, separating and reconverging, a river of ruined bodies flowing through the landscape with the mindless momentum of water finding a downhill grade. "Heard," Wendell said beside me. He'd seen it before I had, I could tell by the way his voice carried the weight of recognition. Something drove them. A fire, an explosion, a sustained noise source miles to the east. They walk toward the stimulus, and as they accumulate, the sound of their own movement keeps the ones behind them following. It self-perpetuates. I saw one of these outside Knoxville from a hilltop. Thousands, moving through the valley like a flood. Will they pass us? If they stay on the road, yes. We're a quarter mile off the county road. No direct line of sight. If they don't have a reason to turn this way, they'll walk right past. And if something gives them a reason? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. "Everyone inside," I said into the radio. "No talking, no movement, total silence. This is not a drill." The next 4 hours were the longest of my life. We sat in the dark house with the windows boarded and the doors barred, and the children held in laps with hands over mouths, not because anyone told us to, but because every adult understood instinctively what a toddler's cry would mean right now. Mia squirmed in Elena's arms, and Elena rocked her with a desperation that was physical, pressing her face against the child's hair, breathing silent prayers into a skull the size of a grapefruit. The sound of them reached us within the hour. Not moaning, that's another movie lie. The sound was footsteps. Hundreds of footsteps on asphalt, a shuffling, scraping, endless percussion that filtered through the trees and the boarded windows and the walls of my father's house and filled the air with the sound of a world that no longer belonged to us. I was at the south observation window, peering through the gap in the plywood. I couldn't see the road from that angle, but I could see the tree line. And twice a figure separated from the column and wandered into the trees toward us. Both times, it stopped, stood swaying, then turned and drifted back toward the road, pulled by the sound of the herd itself. At the 3-hour mark, Mia began to fuss. Elena clamped her hand over the child's mouth, and Mia's eyes went wide with surprise and fear, and she began to struggle. And Elena held tighter, and Craig put his arms around both of them, and I watched Naomi's face across the dark room, and saw the calculation happening. The terrible math of one child's lungs versus 12 lives. Priya moved. She crossed the room in 2 steps, silent in her socked feet, and produced a small syringe. She looked at Elena. Elena looked at Craig. Craig looked at his daughter's face, red and straining. And he nodded once, and Priya administered a tiny dose of the children's Benadryl she'd salvaged from the clinic. Within minutes, Mia was limp and sleeping in her mother's arms. Nobody breathed normally for another hour. The herd passed. The sound faded. By nightfall, the road was empty. When I finally spoke, my voice cracked, and I realized I'd been clenching my jaw for so long that my teeth ached. "We need a secondary location," I said. "If that had come toward us, we'd be dead. We need somewhere to fall back to that isn't in a direct line from the road." A cave, a mine, a structure deeper in the hills. There's an old coal mine entrance on the ridge east of here, Derek said. Half-mile up the trail past the Henderson place. It's been sealed, but the timber might be rotten enough to break through. Tomorrow. First light. Tomorrow. Always tomorrow. We lived our lives in a permanent state of almost safe, almost fed, almost warm, almost dead. The mine was viable. Derek and Marcus spent 2 days clearing the entrance and shoring up the first 50 feet of tunnel with lumber from the equipment shed. It wasn't comfortable, it was dark and damp, and the air tasted like iron and old earth, but it was invisible from the road, defensible at the entrance, and deep enough to muffle any sound from inside. We stocked it with 3 days of food, water, medical supplies, and one of the rifles. A fallback position. Insurance against the next herd. On day 23, 2 things happened that changed the trajectory of everything. The first, Wendell found a frequency. Not Nashville, Chattanooga. A survivor enclave broadcasting on a military band, using call signs and protocols that Wendell recognized as authentic. They identified themselves as a joint civilian-military settlement at the Volunteer Army Ammunition Plant, a secured federal facility with walls, power, and a growing population of verified survivors. They were accepting refugees. They broadcast coordinates and approach protocols twice daily. Chattanooga was 160 miles south. The second thing, Derek found a bite on Sam's arm. He came to me alone, in the barn, while Naomi was inside. His face was a landscape of controlled devastation. "It's not a human bite," he said. "I don't think it is. The spacing of the marks, it looks like an animal. That cat he's been carrying around. But Joel, I need Priya to look at it, and I need you to be there when she does. Because if Naomi sees it before we know what it is, she will come apart." Priya examined the wound with the focus of a surgeon. She cleaned it, measured the tooth impressions with a ruler, and compared them to reference images in a veterinary manual she'd taken from the clinic. "Cat bite," she said. "Feline dental spacing. No human could make this pattern." Derek closed his eyes. "But," Priya continued, "we don't know if the pathogen crosses species. If the cat is infected, if felines can carry it, then this is still a transmission event." "The cat's been on the property since summer," I said. "Long before the outbreak. It was feral, not bitten. We don't know how it was first transmitted to animals in the wild. We don't know the zoonotic profile. We don't know anything for certain. What do? We watch him. 40 minutes to 4 hours. That's the human incubation window. If Sam is fine in 6 hours, he's almost certainly fine. But I need to watch him, and I need someone to be ready if he's not." "Ready to do what?" Priya held my gaze. "Ready for the possibility that we have to restrain a 6-year-old child who is turning in a house with his mother 20 feet away. Are you ready for that, Joel?" I wasn't. No one could be. We told Naomi. There was no alternative. She would have seen the bandage, and lying to her was not something I was capable of or willing to attempt. She listened with a stillness that was worse than screaming. Her face went white, and then it went hard, and then it went somewhere I'd never seen before. A place past fear and past grief, and into a territory that has no name, because no parent should ever have to visit it. She sat with Sam for 6 hours. She held him. She read to him. She checked his temperature every 15 minutes. She talked to him about his favorite things, the barn cat, whose name was Soldier, his best friend from school, whose name was Thomas, the time their father had taken him fishing, and he'd caught a bluegill and cried when they put it back. 6 hours passed. Sam was fine. His temperature was normal. His eyes were clear. He was irritated at being confined to bed and wanted to go find Soldier. Naomi stood up, walked out of the room, walked through the kitchen, walked out the front door, stood in the yard, and screamed once. A single raw sound that scattered birds from the oak tree and echoed off the ridge and came back to us, diminished and terrible. Then she walked back inside and said, "We're going to Chattanooga." I looked at her. "We're going," she repeated. "All of us. Every person in this house. We are not waiting for the next herd or the next bite or the next night that I have to sit and count minutes to find out if my son is still my son. Chattanooga has walls. It has power. It has medicine. We are going. It's 160 miles. I don't care if it's 1,000. We have vehicles. We have weapons. We have a route. We leave in the morning." I looked at Derek. He nodded. I looked at Wendell. He nodded. Marcus, Priya, Craig, Elena, one by one. Every face in the room saying the same thing. Staying had become more dangerous than moving. My father built this farm. My father buried the supplies that had kept us alive. My father's silence and his foresight and his stubborn, wordless love had given us 23 days that most people didn't get. But even my father would have known when to leave. "Okay," I said. "Chattanooga, first light." We spent the night packing. Everything we could carry. The weapons, the medical supplies, the remaining food, water, clothing, the radio, the night vision. We loaded Derek's truck and Marcus's truck and planned a route on paper map south on back roads, avoiding highways, moving in convoy with scouts ahead. At midnight, I walked out to the barn alone. I climbed the loft ladder and stood where I'd kept watch for 23 nights, and looked through the scope at the empty road and the empty field and the dark ridge where my father had hunted deer as a young man. I found a piece of paper and a pen in the workbench drawer. I wrote a note and nailed it to the barn door, in case anyone else ever found this place. Water from the well. Trench to the north. Mine entrance on the east ridge, half-mile past the white farmhouse. We went to Chattanooga. Maddox. It wasn't much, but my father had taught me, in his way, that sometimes the most important thing you leave behind is proof that someone survived long enough to leave. We drove south at dawn, with frost on the windshields, and children sleeping in the back seats and rifles across our laps. The roads were empty and broken and lined with abandoned vehicles that told stories I didn't stop to read. We drove for 3 days. We lost Marcus's truck to a blown radiator on a mountain road outside Jellicoe and packed 13 people into Derek's truck in a configuration that shouldn't have worked but did, because no one complained and no one took up more space than they needed. We reached the ammunition plant on the evening of the 3rd day. The walls were real. The lights were real. The soldiers at the gate checked us for bites, took our names, and led us to a processing area where a woman in a FEMA vest handed Lily a juice box, and Lily held it with both hands and stared at it like it was something from a world she'd already started to forget. Naomi stood in the processing line with Sam on her hip and Derek beside her, and she looked at me across the room, and I saw on her face the same expression our father had in every photograph I'd ever seen of him. Not happiness, not relief, but the grim, enduring satisfaction of someone who got their people through. I don't know what comes next. I don't know if the walls will hold, or the food will last, or the world will heal, or if this is just the next barn, the next cache, the next act of preparation before the next disaster. But I know what my father knew. You do what you can. You bury what might save them. You trust that someone will find it at the right time. And if you're lucky, if you're stubborn, and scared and loved enough. You get to be the one who digs it up.